There's a certain kind of loneliness that doesn't feel like emptiness at first. It feels like quiet, manageable, almost normal. It's the quiet of getting through your day without realizing how long it's been since someone called you by your name in a way that felt warm. It's the quiet of eating meals while scrolling your phone, not because anything on it is interesting, but because it distracts you from the fact that no one is sitting across from you. It's the quiet that lingers when you lie down at night and suddenly become aware that the only voice you've heard all day with any real emotion was your own, inside your head. For many people, this isn't a temporary phase or an aesthetic solitude. It's a long, stretching landscape of isolation that feels both familiar and suffocating. And while outsiders might assume friendlessness is a choice, something born from introversion or preference, it rarely is. The truth is far more complex, more layered, more quietly heartbreaking. People without friends often carry stories that no one's ever asked to hear, experiences buried so deeply that even they've forgotten what started the unraveling. Psychologically, the absence of friendship doesn't just sit on the surface of someone's life, it reshapes it. Not all at once, but gradually, slowly, like water wearing grooves into stone. When researchers study chronic social isolation, they find changes not only in mood or behavior, but in the architecture of the brain itself. Areas responsible for understanding others' emotions begin to quiet down. The neural circuits used in reading body language or picking up subtle social cues become less active, like muscles that atrophy from disuse. The mind adapts to absence because that's what it's designed to do, survive the environment it's given, even if that environment is loneliness. But people rarely arrive at this place suddenly. There is almost always a trail, often subtle, sometimes invisible, even to the person experiencing it. Maybe it began in childhood, the moment they realized they were the odd one out, the one overlooked when teams were chosen or secrets were shared. Maybe it came later, after betrayals that taught them vulnerability was dangerous, or after groups they trusted faded away without any explanation, leaving behind questions they still don't have answers to. Small cuts accumulate, disappointments stack. Each one sends a message. Be careful. Don't open up too quickly. Don't trust too much. Don't expect people to stay. Over time, these warnings become internalized rules. The mind begins to protect its owner the only way it knows how, by building invisible walls. A person who desperately craves connection may begin interpreting neutral expressions as disinterest. A slow reply becomes a sign of rejection. A cancelled plan confirms a suspicion they've held about themselves for years. Their brain, shaped by past pain, becomes hyper-alert to even the faintest signal of potential hurt. And in trying so hard to avoid rejection, they may unintentionally behave in ways that push people further away. There's a strange irony here. Many people without friends aren't lacking social understanding. In fact, they often possess extraordinary emotional insight. When you spend years observing interactions from the outside, you notice details others overlook. The mismatched smile and eyes, the subtle shift in someone's tone, the way social groups rearrange themselves without anyone acknowledging it. You become sensitive to the quiet truths people try to hide. But this sensitivity, this depth, becomes a double-edged sword. Once you see through small talk and social performances, it becomes harder to accept anything that feels hollow. You hunger for authenticity, for connection that doesn't feel like an act. But authentic relationships require vulnerability, and vulnerability is the very thing that feels the most dangerous. So you wait. You wait for someone safe enough to open up to, someone who sees you without you having to perform. But while you wait, others often mistake your caution for disinterest. They assume you're aloof or detached when, in reality, you're simply afraid of being hurt again. And so the gap widens, your longing growing on one side, their misunderstanding solidifying on the other. In the absence of friends, the internal world becomes louder. Without people to share daily thoughts with, you begin having long conversations with yourself. You replay old interactions, wondering what you said wrong or what you could have done differently. You rehearse future conversations that may never happen, constructing whole scenes in your mind where things finally go right. You imagine friendships you haven't lived yet, ones where you're understood, appreciated, effortlessly included. This inner world becomes both sanctuary and suffocation. It protects you from rejection, but it also keeps you trapped in cycles of self-reflection without the grounding presence of another person to balance your perspective. As the years pass, something else happens. Your sense of self begins to warp. When you rarely receive external affirmation, you start defining yourself through a distorted lens. You focus on your supposed shortcomings. You minimize your strengths. You become convinced you have nothing of value to offer in a friendship. So when someone does show interest, you greet it with suspicion instead of hope. You assume they're being polite, or that they want something, or that they'll eventually see the real you and leave. This skepticism is a survival mechanism, but it also sabotages the very connections you crave. And yet, beneath all this fear and doubt, there's a yearning, an almost painful desire for depth. People without friends often want connection more intensely than anyone else. They don't want superficial interactions or casual acquaintanceships that never go deeper than surface level. They want the kind of bond where silence feels comfortable, where the trust is implicit, where they can show their inner world without fearing it's too much. But because the desire is so strong, they often reject anything that doesn't meet that depth immediately. Small talk feels meaningless. Light interactions feel insufficient. They want to start at the end, at the intimacy others take years to build. But friendships don't form this way. They grow slowly, in layers, through repetition and mutual risk. And when someone hasn't had that process in a long time, they forget what it feels like. They forget how to ease into connection gradually. They feel out of sync with the pace of social life. And the longer they spend without practicing those skills, the more foreign they become. Conversations that once flowed naturally now require tremendous effort. They monitor every word, every expression, every tiny reaction. They second-guess themselves constantly. It feels like trying to remember how to move a limb that hasn't been used in years. Technically possible, but painfully awkward. This loss of social instinct becomes a vicious loop. The more awkward they feel, the more anxious they become. The more anxious they become, the more mistakes they make, or think they're making. Each uncomfortable moment reinforces the belief that they're bad at relationships, that there's something fundamentally wrong with them. And so they retreat again, choosing solitude not because they want it, but because the alternative feels unbearable. Pulling away feels safer, but it also deepens the isolation. Days begin to blur together, marked not by shared experiences, but by routines that repeat without variation. Weekends stretch out like long corridors with no doors. Holidays become reminders of everything that's missing. Birthdays pass quietly, sometimes without even a message from someone who truly knows you. Life takes on a muted quality, as if you're watching it through glass. You move through the world, but you're not fully in it. You observe interactions instead of participating in them, noticing how easily other people slip into conversations and connections that feel inaccessible to you. You become acutely aware of the ways society expects people to be social. You notice how often people talk about their friends, inside jokes, group plans, shared memories. You see how effortlessly others gather around tables, how naturally they fill a room with laughter and inside references. And even though you try not to compare, it becomes increasingly difficult. It feels like everyone else received a handbook on connection that never made its way to you. This awareness creates a pressure that's hard to describe. You learn to hide your loneliness because admitting it feels like revealing a failure. When someone asks what you did over the weekend, you craft an answer that sounds normal, even if the truth is that you barely left your room. When you're invited to an event that expects you to bring someone with you, you decline rather than explain that there's no one to ask. You become skilled at invisibility, at blending in just enough so people don't notice the void behind your polite smiles. Technology complicates this further. You scroll through photos of other people's friendships, group dinners, vacations, casual hangouts that seem ordinary to them but feel unreachable to you. Every image becomes another reminder of what you lack. You tell yourself social media is a highlight reel, but the comparison still lands somewhere deep, somewhere bruised. Yet despite the pain it causes, you keep scrolling, hoping for a momentary sense of connection, even if it's through observation rather than participation. At the same time, digital spaces offer a strange kind of refuge. Online, you can talk without revealing your face. You can join communities anonymously. You can share your thoughts without the fear of someone watching your expression change. But even these connections, when they happen, highlight the absence of something deeper. Virtual closeness can't fully replace the warmth of someone sitting beside you, the comfort of being physically present with another human being. Emotionally, isolation begins to change you in subtle but profound ways. Feelings start to accumulate inside you because there's no one to share them with. Joy, when it appears, feels muted, incomplete, like a spark that flickers but doesn't fully ignite because there's no one to witness it. Sadness expands, filling the spaces where conversation should be. Moments that would normally be softened by another person's presence become sharper, heavier. You end up carrying emotions that were never meant to be held alone. Over time, this emotional weight creates a kind of storage room in your mind. You stack unsaid thoughts, unshared stories, unanswered questions. You hold on to them, waiting for the day you'll finally have someone to tell. But as months turn into years, the stories lose their freshness. The emotions attached to them fade or warp. And when someone does finally show up, if they ever do, you realize you can't suddenly unload years' worth of silence onto them. You can't hand them everything at once. The backlog of emotion becomes its own barrier, leaving you unsure of where to begin or whether it's even fair to try. Hope becomes complicated. Some days you feel certain things will change. You imagine meeting someone who understands you, someone who sees past your quiet exterior and recognizes the depth beneath it. On those days, you feel a small spark of possibility, like the world might still surprise you. But on other days, you feel resigned to your solitude. You convince yourself it's easier this way, that human relationships are too unpredictable, too fragile, too painful to risk again. You oscillate between longing and numbness, hope and withdrawal. The inconsistency becomes exhausting. Something else happens as you move through life without the grounding presence of close friends. You start over-accommodating. You become grateful for even the smallest amount of social attention, so you try to be as easy to be around as possible. You say yes when you want to say no. You agree with things you don't believe. You make yourself smaller, quieter, simpler, hoping that reducing your needs will make others more likely to stay. But this people-pleasing instinct backfires. By molding yourself to what you think others want, You rob them of the chance to know the real you. You become a reflection of their preferences instead of a person with your own. And relationships built on this kind of self-erasure can never become genuine. The fear of being too much grows louder. You monitor your own behavior. Am I talking too much? Am I too quiet? Am I asking for too much reassurance? Am I sharing too soon? You become hyper-conscious of your presence, editing yourself in real time. Even when you're physically with people, you're not fully there. Half your attention is devoted to self-surveillance, making sure you don't cross some invisible boundary that might push someone away. Life without friends also changes how you experience time. Without shared events to punctuate your weeks, everything begins to feel strangely flat. The calendar loses its meaning. Days blend together because nothing marks them. There's no spontaneity, no unexpected invitation, no moment that shifts the rhythm of your life even slightly. Time becomes something you endure rather than something you live. And yet, within this barren emotional landscape, something unexpected takes shape. Without the distraction of constant social interaction, you begin to develop a strong relationship with yourself. Not always a comfortable one, but a deep one. You learn your own patterns, your triggers, your desires, your fears. You develop interests unshaped by peer pressure. You discover what you genuinely enjoy, not what others told you to enjoy. In many ways, you gain a kind of self-knowledge most people never reach because they never spend enough time alone to find it. This depth, this introspective insight, often becomes a unique strength. You understand human behavior not just from participating in relationships, but from watching them from the outside, quietly, carefully, often painfully. You see dynamics others overlook. You recognize authenticity more clearly than most. But this clarity creates its own challenges. When you understand human nature so well, it becomes harder to step into relationships without analyzing everything. Harder to relax into trust. Harder to believe people's intentions at face value. Harder to silence the part of your mind that questions everything. You start preparing for interactions the way others prepare for big events. A simple meetup becomes something you rehearse mentally. You imagine different conversation paths. You anticipate awkward moments. By the time you actually show up, you're already tired from all the planning. Socializing becomes less about connection and more about performance, something that drains you even when it goes well. And after each interaction, the inner critic returns. You replay every sentence, every expression, every moment of silence. You interpret neutral details as mistakes. You convince yourself you sounded strange, looked uncomfortable, or came across in a way you didn't intend. Without a friend to offer reassurance or perspective, your mind becomes both judge and jury, magnifying flaws that no one else noticed. Eventually, home becomes the only place where the performance stops. It's where you can exhale, where you don't have to pretend or monitor or calculate. But the comfort of home can become too strong, so strong it turns into avoidance. The outside world begins to feel distant, overwhelming, foreign. You retreat further, telling yourself you'll try again tomorrow, or next week, or when you feel ready. But readiness rarely comes. With each passing day, re-entering the social world becomes harder. The deeper the retreat, the stronger the illusion of safety becomes. You tell yourself that you prefer being alone, that solitude is simpler, cleaner, more predictable, and in many ways, it is. There's no risk of rejection when you don't reach out, no misunderstandings when you don't speak, no disappointments when you don't expect anything. But beneath that sense of control lies another truth. Humans were never meant to navigate the emotional world on their own. We're built for connection, not as a luxury, but as a fundamental part of how our minds and hearts make sense of life. Without it, something begins to fray quietly inside, even if you've learned to ignore it. Technology fills some of the gaps, but not all. You might spend hours watching videos, scrolling timelines, or browsing conversations between people you don't know. It gives the illusion of engagement, the impression of being part of a world that's constantly interacting. But once the screen goes dark, the silence in the room feels even heavier. Digital connection mimics the shape of community without offering the substance of it. It lets you observe human relationships without fully participating in them. And the contrast between those two states can be devastating. As isolation deepens, your internal rhythms begin to change. You might stay awake late into the night because those hours feel gentler, quieter, more aligned with the pace of your thoughts. Nighttime becomes a kind of emotional refuge, the one part of the day where you're not comparing yourself to anyone else's life. But these late hours also invite introspection that can quickly turn overwhelming. You replay old memories. You re-examine moments you haven't thought about in years. You picture versions of yourself that might have existed if things had unfolded differently. The silence becomes a mirror you can't avoid. You start noticing things that others don't. How easily co-workers form alliances. How naturally classmates drift into groups. How people seem to sense unspoken cues that you've spent years trying to decode. You watch them with a kind of distant longing, wondering how they learned these unwritten rules of connection. You see friendships blossom around you like spontaneous rituals. Rituals you were never taught. Rituals you don't know how to join. The more you watch, the more foreign you feel, as if everyone else is instinctively fluent in a language you only understand in theory. And yet, despite all the pain woven into this experience, there is something quietly remarkable about people who live without friends. They develop a resilience that isn't loud or visible. It's the resilience of surviving long stretches of emotional winter without letting the cold turn them cruel. It's the resilience of waking up each day and navigating a world that constantly reminds them of what they lack. It's the resilience of learning to comfort themselves in moments when other people have comfort. This lonely resilience, however, often goes unrecognized, even by the person carrying it. Instead, they see themselves as weak, flawed, or deficient. They internalize every failed interaction as proof that they're unworthy of connection. They forget all the battles they fight in silence. They forget how much strength it takes to face each day without a support system. They forget that surviving loneliness is not failure, it's endurance of the highest kind. But endurance comes with consequences. It shapes how you see yourself and how you imagine others see you. Slowly, the idea forms that you're fundamentally different from everyone else, not in a unique or special way, but in a way that sets you apart, permanently. You start believing your loneliness is a personal flaw, a sign that something inside you is unfixable. You assume others can sense this difference, even when they can't. You read rejection where none exists. You pull back even when someone reaches out. Not because you don't want connection, but because you don't trust it. Trust becomes a fragile thing. You might crave closeness, but the moment someone gets too near, the alarms in your mind begin to sound. What if they leave like others did? What if they see the parts of you you've learned to hide? What if you disappoint them? What if you become a burden? These questions grow louder than the desire to connect. They become the net that catches your hope before it can take flight. And yet, beneath all the fear, beneath all the layers of doubt and self-protection, there remains a very simple truth. People without friends often love deeply. Not many people realize this, but when someone has gone years without meaningful connection, the value of friendship becomes immense. They don't take people for granted. They don't offer shallow affection. They don't play social games. Their loyalty runs deep. Their care is sincere. Their presence is intentional. They understand the fragility of human connection better than anyone, which makes them treasure it even more. This capacity for depth is something extraordinary. It's one of the quiet gifts of isolation, the ability to see and feel in ways others overlook. But like all gifts, it needs the right environment to thrive. It needs reciprocity. It needs space. It needs another human being who meets it with gentleness rather than fear. Unfortunately, the world isn't always built for this kind of depth. Modern social life prioritizes speed over intimacy, convenience over commitment, performance over authenticity. For someone who craves real connection, this can feel like another closed door. Still, there is hope. Connection doesn't disappear permanently. Social skills, even when they feel lost, can be relearned. The mind is remarkably adaptable. The same brain that reshaped itself to survive isolation can reshape itself again to welcome connection. It won't happen suddenly, and it won't happen without discomfort. But growth rarely happens in comfort. The path out of loneliness doesn't begin with waiting for the right people to appear. It begins with small, almost imperceptible steps, the kind that feel trivial at first. Saying hello, responding when someone asks a question, allowing a conversation to continue for 30 seconds longer than you normally would, showing up to something even when you're nervous, letting yourself be seen, even briefly. These steps don't feel like much, but repeated over time, they become a new pattern, a new possibility, a new way of being in the world. And eventually, something shifts. A conversation feels easier than expected. An interaction lasts longer than usual. Someone laughs at something you said, and for a moment, the heaviness lifts. These small victories accumulate, even if you don't notice them. Social muscle begins returning, slowly, cautiously. The rust loosens. The fear softens. What once felt impossible starts to feel slightly less terrifying. And slightly less terrifying is where many real friendships begin. Understanding the psychology of living without friends reveals something deeply human. Loneliness isn't a personal flaw. It's an adaptation, a response to circumstances, a shield that once protected you but now keeps you at a distance from what you long for. It's not who you are, it's what happened to you. And what happened to you can be understood, softened, and changed. So if you find yourself walking this path, carrying silence you never asked for, remember this. Your sensitivity is not weakness. Your introspection is not a burden. Your longing for deep connection is not unrealistic. These qualities are evidence of your capacity for real, meaningful relationship. They are signs of depth, not deficiency. You are not hard to know. You have simply gone too long without someone who tried. And whether connection arrives tomorrow or slowly finds its way back over years, nothing about your loneliness makes you unworthy of it. Not then, not now, not ever.